Hello, I'm Kirsten Aiken. Welcome to the Business Summer Series and this special episode looking at Australia's race to net zero. Coming up on the program, not in my backyard, the revolt against the renewables rollout threatening national energy targets.
You're going to destroy the Illawarra to generate electricity.
If we can't contribute to tackling the problem, then who can?
And the nuclear war of words as the coalition floats a national rollout of small reactors.
They think the answer is to put the most expensive form of power available into our grid, when we have no nuclear industry.
Also on the program, tackling range anxiety in the outback, the push to roll out solar-powered charging stations.
Could you go to Uluru in this EV?
I'm going to Uluru tomorrow.
The Australian government has been spruiking its climate credentials on the world stage, most recently at the UN Climate Change Conference in Dubai. But the road to net zero has been full of hurdles. 10,000 kilometres of transmission lines need to be built to connect renewable energy projects to consumers as coal-fired power stations close. But in some affected regions, communities are pushing back, saying not in my backyard. Nadia Daly reports.
We have been living in the Illawarra for the past 25 years and it's been a great area for us.
Grant Drinkwater loves where he lives, but he's worried this natural beauty could be put at risk from a proposed offshore wind farm.
You're going to destroy the Illawarra to generate electricity.
The government says the wind turbines would be at least 10 kilometres offshore and will barely be visible from land.
Well, the consultation was really poorly done initially. Our main concern is the impact on the environment.
Other locals like Sophia Walter say the project is critical to reduce carbon emissions.
I can understand that people don't want to see development in their backyard, but this is the most industrial seascape I have seen in Australia.
The company behind the project, OceanX Energy, says the consultation process has just begun and environmental studies will need to confirm wildlife won't be harmed before it proceeds. Around Australia, there are dozens of infrastructure projects needed to meet renewable targets. As far as transmission lines go, the Australian Energy Market Operator says 10,000 kilometres of them will need to be built by 2050. There are 6 zones flagged for offshore wind farms. Just one has been approved so far.
At the moment, we're not on track to achieve 82% renewables by 2030 across the country.
To get Australia back on track, the federal government is expanding a taxpayer-funded scheme to subsidise and underwrite new projects. It says the country will reduce emissions by 42% by 2030, but admits more work needs to be done with communities.
To make sure that people who are going to be adversely affected are approached and treated with appropriately and solutions found. Because once you treat people inappropriately, then they're offside. If we don't get this done, then not only are our renewable energy targets at risk, but our climate change targets at risk.
Another major project has drawn the ire of locals in regional Victoria. This message to a power company was mowed into the lawn by 5th-generation potato farmer Joey Aganetti Fraser.
We've got a right in our say in our own land and they should hear us.
The proposed Western Renewables Link transmission line would move electricity through this property and others from green power sources like solar and wind farms in the state's west to a terminal station in Melbourne's north.
This landscape isn't just beautiful, it's also these farmers' livelihoods, and that's what they're worried is at risk with the proposed power lines. They're concerned it will devalue their land and hamper farming operations.
It will completely destroy the way we farm and operate. We can't use any sort of machinery under them, whether it be our headers, harvesters, tractors, they're all reached the limit of 3 metres.
That leaves a stalemate.
Compulsory acquisition is a mechanism and is available. However, as I say, we're working through with landholders. We speak to them regularly.
AusNet admits initial consultations didn't go as planned.
We didn't do it as well as we should have done.
What sort of compensation are you offering landholders?
It can vary from 100,000 up to millions and millions.
While Joey says she's not against green energy, she says it's also too late to find a compromise.
There's no negotiation at all with AusNet or the VNI West. No amount of money and compensation would make up for it.
No easy solution to a difficult problem.
The federal opposition says the government is ruling out the most credible path to net zero by refusing to consider replacing coal-fired power with a fleet of small modular nuclear reactors. The government has labelled it unproven technology and says it comes with a hefty price tag. Rachel Papazzoni reports.
This is Australia's only nuclear reactor on the outskirts of Sydney. It's used primarily for medicine. Since 1998, there's been a bipartisan ban on nuclear power generation. Now the coalition wants that to change.
Small modular reactors, the experts are saying, a great place to consider would be retiring coal-fired power stations because you can leverage the existing infrastructure, especially transmission lines.
It wants 71 small modular reactors installed on existing coal infrastructure across the country and has criticised what it calls the government's reckless race to renewables. The government says that would cost $387 billion.
They think the answer is to put the most expensive form of power available into our grid. When we have no nuclear industry, we have no regulations in place, it would cost even more than it's facing in other countries, and around the world it's facing cost blowouts and time blowouts.
A small modular reactor, or SMR, is a nuclear plant, but on a smaller scale. They're built en masse in a factory and rolled out to their location. Critics say it's untested on a large scale, and any Australian rollout would take at least 2 decades.
It's an idea at very early stages. There's one operating SMR in Russia, which is based on an icebreaker ship. There are a number of other ones in process of production in China and in Russia, but these still are one-offs. I'm afraid it's still a long way from something we can call an industry.
Proponents say nuclear power can provide the kind of energy certainty other sources like wind and solar can't.
There needs to be a baseload power that would provide energy independently from the weather or other factors 24/7. And we believe that nuclear energy and SMR specifically could potentially be that energy.
But that comes with a big price tag. Government modelling shows in 2030 the capital cost per kilowatt would be more than $18,000, compared to just over $1,000 for large-scale solar and nearly $2,000 for onshore wind. Energy experts say those costs will prohibit business investment.
It's inconceivable that nuclear will be developed by the private sector. It will need government orchestration.
The World Economic Forum forecasts nuclear power generation could be valued at $300 billion by 2040.
The early 2030s, that's where we should see the large scalability and use of that across the globe.
But solar and wind could be worth $3 trillion worldwide by 2030, according to global data firm Statista. Australians are divided over our energy future.
Nuclear. Renewables. I believe that nuclear, if it was controlled, is the better way to go.
Who wants to live nearby the radiation activities? No.
The more different approaches that we can do, the better, I think. So I would say both.
Recent polling by Essential Research found roughly half of Australians support nuclear energy. But with both major parties digging in, this issue could end up being decided at the ballot box.
I just very much look forward to this debate in the election.
So expect the debate to heat up.
In the federal budget, the government announced extra cash to supercharge the hydrogen industry. Some analysts say it could deliver Australia a resources investment boom. Our third largest trading partner, South Korea, wants Australian green hydrogen to help it cut carbon emissions to net zero by 2050. Here's Rachel Papazzoni again. She travelled to the country courtesy of the Walkley Foundation for this report.
There is a crisis, energy crisis, and there is demand. there is a lot of momentum in getting hydrogen projects across the road.
Filling up at this station on the way to South Korea's technology capital Ulsan takes all of about 5 minutes. The fuel is hydrogen. At the moment, fewer than 1% of vehicles made by the nation's largest car manufacturer Hyundai are hydrogen powered. The government plans to install another 1,000 stations like this one by 2040. South Korea is racing ahead to meet its carbon neutrality target by 2050. A big part of that is with hydrogen, and it can't reach that final destination without Australia.
Emission-free, sustainable transportation solution is a present-day reality.
Korea is Australia's third largest trading partner, importing more than $24 billion worth of coal and gas from us in 2021-22. It's hoped those strong ties will be relied on to meet the nation's 2050 energy target.
It's not going to be possible for Korea to produce all of that hydrogen domestically, so they're going to need to import it from elsewhere. Because of the strength and trust and longevity in the Australia-Korea relationship, there's strong potential for our companies to work together to help fill that Korean need for clean hydrogen.
But the viability of hydrogen is still being tested.
We think incentives really need to start in order to feel like this hydrogen story is not just hype, but it has reality to it.
The United States is speeding up its energy transition. The $369 billion Inflation Reduction Act promises massive subsidies for renewable and green projects. Here, the Albanese government's injecting $2 billion into the hydrogen industry. Fortescue, which itself has invested about $1 billion into R&D, says it's a first step.
I certainly see a future where hydrogen and the export of renewable energy will be as important as iron ore, other commodities and LNG have been to the Australian economy.
Korea's demand for hydrogen is gaining momentum. The country imports more than 90% of its energy and natural resources. The biggest zinc refinery in the world, Korea Zinc, produces metals to make the batteries the world needs to electrify. It sources much of its power from its Australian energy business, which is developing a hydrogen hub in Townsville.
Without Australia, we can make renewable energy 100 by 2050.
Korea Zinc, via its subsidiary Arc Energy, hopes to import more than 500,000 tonnes of green hydrogen from Australia every year.
But transporting hydrogen, which needs to be converted from a gas to a liquid and kept at minus 250 degrees Celsius, isn't easy.
There are notable energy losses in conversion to, say, something like ammonia, which hydrogen can be converted to and then sent across the sea. But if you send it as liquid hydrogen, there are even bigger penalties in terms of energy loss because you have to cool it so much.
Korea's government-owned research hub, Ulsan Technology Park, is calling on Australia to work together to overcome those challenges.
I suggest to cooperate in terms of shipbuilding and mass production of ammonia to supply to Korea.
60 kilometres north of Ulsan is the city of Pohang and home to Australia's single biggest customer, POSCO. It buys more than $7 billion worth of Australian resources like iron ore and coal every year. Korea's biggest steelmaker, POSCO, plans to invest $28 billion in Australia as part of its investment into hydrogen. It wants to use hydrogen to fuel a plant near Western Australia's iron ore mines that refines ore into hot briquetted iron, which is then shipped to Korea to be turned into steel.
I actually think that's the big opportunity that hydrogen presents Australia, is that given the challenges to transport hydrogen by ship, we actually have an opportunity to do more value-add processing onshore and then export that product.
About half of all new resources projects in the pipeline are centred around hydrogen. If all goes to plan, analysts say it could deliver Australia its next resources investment boom.
It was a deal aimed at accelerating Australia's transition to net zero. But in the end, the takeover offer for energy giant Origin from Brookfield and EIG didn't get enough support from shareholders. The scheme's biggest shareholder and critic, Australian Super, welcomed the outcome and indicated it's open to putting capital towards helping Origin go green. This story from Nassim Kadem.
It's too low, and I feel we should be an Australian company, not foreign owned.
I can't see any reason why you'd sell the company out overseas owned. Like, we're Aussies, we can do it.
Origin needed to secure the backing of 75% of shareholders, but only 69% were in favour. The nation's largest super fund, Australian Super, used its 17.5% stake to block the takeover, arguing the offer of $9.39 per share undervalued the company. It said the value and future value of Origin is better in the hands of members and other shareholders rather than a private equity consortium seeking to make a quick return, and that the super fund is open to providing capital to assist Origin.
There's going to be no shortage of opportunities for co-investment alongside Origin through the energy transition.
Investors are hoping that with the backing of big super funds, Origin can ramp up its investment in renewables. Without it, there's warnings electricity prices could stay higher for longer.
In the near term, the no outcome has no direct bearing on the price of electricity, but over the next 2, 3, 4 years, we need to see capital deployed. Brookfield was offering to deploy 14 gigawatts of new renewable energy capacity. When you increase supply, you lower prices.
The transition plan does remain the same, so we would be looking to build about 5 gigawatts between now and 2030.
Retail shareholders are also calling on Origin to step up its game.
It's really important for Origin to really consider, do they have the right plans in place to deliver on the government targets that they've set in place around decarbonisation for Australia.
It's a message that big companies and their cashed up investors are starting to heed.
2023 saw one of Australia's richest men win control of a controversial renewable project proposed for the outback. Victor Mike Cannon Brooks had been battling fellow multi-billionaire Andrew Forrest to take over Sun Cable after they fell out over its goal to send energy to Singapore. Mr Forrest said he became unconvinced of the commercial viability of exporting solar power from the outback to the island nation via a subsea cable. The men also had different visions for how to use the 20 gigawatts of power the solar farm is expected to generate. In the desert of the United Arab Emirates, one of the world's biggest solar plants is helping to power the fast-growing city of Dubai. Advocates say it's also a shining example of why so-called solar thermal technology needs to be deployed in Australia if the country wants secure green energy. From there, Daniel Mercer reports.
A dazzling beacon in the desert. This giant 250-metre high tower looms over the landscape for miles around. It's the centrepiece of a massive solar plant, the focal point for thousands of mirrors spread across a vast area that can be seen from space.
It's the biggest integrated concentrating solar power plant in the world. There's 700 megawatts of concentrating solar thermal power generation.
Known as Noor Energy, the plant uses special mirrors to concentrate the sun's rays, generating temperatures of up to 565 degrees Celsius. In doing so, salt is melted and then stored, before being used to generate electricity through a steam turbine. Crucially, and unlike conventional solar panels, the plant can store the energy for up to 15 hours, providing renewable power at night and during cloudy days.
This plant that we're standing in could power 450,000 Australian homes 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
The renewable energy industry says it's the type of thing Australia needs.
It shows us the scale of renewable energy generation that's possible and the sort of things that, frankly, we need a lot more of these into the future if we're going to get to net zero.
The challenge at the heart of the energy transition
It's how to fill in the blanks when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. Advocates say solar thermal plants like this giant construction here can help solve many of those problems. Catch is, they don't come cheap.
It was $3.8 billion US.
It's a tidy sum.
It's a tidy sum, but remember, when you build a plant like this, there's no fuel costs.
An industry hoping for a bright future down under.
Australia has been driving in the slow lane when it comes to the uptake of electric vehicles, and a lack of policy is to blame. The federal government is yet to announce what Australia's fuel efficiency standards will be. EV car makers say we must adopt the world's best standards or will continue to be a dumping ground for polluting vehicles. Rihanna Whitson reports.
More Australians are buckling up in the race to go electric. But we've been driving in the slow lane, and the industry says there's a way to speed up.
If Australia doesn't get the fuel efficiency standard quite right, that we'll just continue to sort of dwell at the bottom of the pile again. We really need to push forward.
To push forward means penalising manufacturers of polluting cars.
When the Transport Minister said that it had to be in line with Australia's unique position, that's a little bit of a concern for us, particularly given almost 70% of Australians live in a capital city.
Proponents of EVs have welcomed the new federal government's plans to legislate fuel efficiency standards.
But making sure that we're setting our fuel efficiency standard, which is in line with other countries, will be really important.
The toughest fuel efficiency standards are in Europe, followed by the US and New Zealand. The world's biggest market, China, comes in ninth.
Australia has become a dumping ground for lots of the dirtier cars that are being produced in the world.
That's because Australia joins Russia as one of only a few developed nations without fuel efficiency standards. And that's why the Federal Department of Transport says in the EU there are more than 200 models available compared to only 60 in Australia. China is the biggest market for electric vehicles, followed by Europe. University of Queensland academic John Quiggin says another glaring issue is Australia's appalling lack of EV charging stations.
We've got a couple right behind me in the shot, but that's I think the only ones in a campus where 20 or 30,000 people come. Although the situation's improved, there's still only a limited number of charging stations on major highways, so if one of them breaks down, you can have significant interruptions to a trip.
The car lobby argues Australians also want affordable vehicles.
If the price of the new technology is too high, we will not have the adoption. So any CO2 target in the world doesn't work if people cannot afford to purchase the products. I think we should leave it to the experts, which are the motor vehicle brands around the world.
In 2022, Chinese car maker BYD overtook Tesla in sales. As competition heats up, Tesla's cutting the price of its models. Volvo's Polestar says more EVs in the Australian market will bring prices down.
What we also really need to consider is our second-hand market. It's imperative that governments shift their fleets over to electric vehicles to help ensure that in a couple of years' time we've got a really solid used car market of electric vehicles to help more low-income earners get into electric vehicles at a more reasonable price.
Driving into the future.
Driving an electric car in the outback brings a new meaning to range anxiety. Covering vast distances needs careful planning, but now a government-funded rollout of fast charging stations is underway. An off-grid solar-powered charging system is also being trialled, but needs large-scale investment before travellers can plug in. Amelia Terzont reports.
The Stuart Highway is one of Australia's longest roads, and its remoteness is posing a challenge for electric cars. This Tesla owner charges his battery at roadhouses and caravan parks when he goes on drives around central Australia.
Could you go to Uluru in this EV?
I'm going to Uluru tomorrow. It's a bit of planning and it's a big day, but you can.
Hunter Murray wants more charges along the Stuart Highway so regional Australia isn't left behind.
We've really just got to make sure that infrastructure's in, and it's hard here in the territory because we don't really have a grid.
The logistics could get easier for Hunter as more chargers are installed. Many of those currently around Alice Springs to Uluru aren't the type that can quickly charge a car. More than 100 sites in remote and regional locations, including in Central Australia, are now getting faster chargers as part of a $90 million program by the federal government and the NRMA. But there are connection challenges in the bush.
The main barrier is the grid, the constraints on the grid. So it's really difficult to connect large charging infrastructure, public charging infrastructure easily.
Carly says in some locations they're going in without any existing power at all.
So we've had to develop a off-grid, what we're calling a standalone power charging system to cater for that problem.
The organisation is working with this manufacturer in regional Queensland.
That's our current charge at the moment.
The company's prototype has solar panels, battery storage and a backup diesel generator.
To provide fast charging facilities in very remote and regional locations where there is either a constraint on the grid where they can't get enough energy or in fact no grid at all.
It's soon being shipped out to the Stewart Highway along Hunter Murray's Drive to Uluru.
So a couple of cars can charge at once in the middle of nowhere and get on their merry way again.
But the prototype is expensive at about $500,000, meaning it needs investment to scale up. And that is no sure thing with its installation just a trial.
If you go too fast in terms of rolling out the infrastructure, then they'll become underutilised. If you go too slow, then you end up with queues and people aren't happy.
Dr Dwyer warns the electrification of regional Australia will face setbacks.
We're going to require many, many more electricians and electrical engineers, particularly where you've got remote regions. We should be starting this yesterday as opposed to starting it today.
The Minister for Climate Change and Energy says they're not worried about cost blowouts or delays.
Of course, any new program like this is going to have its challenges. You're putting charges into areas where in some cases there's no electricity grid. This is a big infrastructure project.
The federal government says that it doesn't want regional Australians to be left behind, and advocates for charging stations in the bush say that this is about equity of services for anyone who doesn't live in a big city.
Need a charge? Yeah, here you go.
Hunter has already installed a fast charger at his business in Alice Springs. His employee wants more of them installed right across the bush.
To be able to travel, and have a charger every couple of 100 kilometres, I think a lot more people would quite happily jump into an EV.
The national highway rollout will begin in months.
And that's all from this episode of the Business Summer Series. For more business stories, head to our website or catch up anytime on iView. The Business will return on air weeknights from January 29th. I'm Kirsten Aiken. Thanks for watching.